Great to be chatting with Steve Bignell from Meat and Livestock Australia. How's it going, Steve?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us, Ricky.
All right. Well, before we talk about what's happening in southeastern Australia on the cattle and sheep markets, I notice you've got your new live export indicator up there, which is going to be of interest to some listeners.
Yeah, so this year on April the 26th, after Anzac Day, we launched actually the first new indicator in 7 years. So we launched the live export price indicator, and that looks at males going into the Indonesian feedlot system out of the Port of Darwin.
Yeah, and I imagine there might not necessarily be any impact of this foot and mouth concern in Indonesia at the moment, even on that indicator, because they're still going to need our cattle.
Yeah, so it's operating at $4.70 at the moment. There's obviously more. There's the seasonal influence, sort of mustering starting up, and that's increasing supply, and that has eased price a little bit there.
Yep, okay. So looking back on the domestic market, the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator, it's slipped below the 1100 mark, but what's the sort of drill down on what's been happening in South Australia, Victoria and southern New South Wales?
Interestingly, the sort of when we talked at the start of this year, Dalby and Roma were really driving what was happening in the Eckie. What we've seen at the moment is Wagga is actually up there nearly on par with Roma. So we are seeing the southern cattle contribute just as much to the Eckie than the Queensland is. And Dubbo is not far behind at 8%. So 8% of cattle going through the Eckie come through Dubbo. So we have seen the composition sort of move from Queensland like we saw at the start of the year.
Yeah, and that's interesting because the Riverina Livestock Agents commentary that they ran earlier in the week about Monday's market indicated they said the prices were a bit erratic, a bit on the downside. What's happening there?
So Wagga is still operating just slightly below where the Eckie is sitting normally. So Wagga is just slightly below, it's 2 cents. So the price in Wagga at the moment, there's 1,200 head from Wagga going through the Eckie, and they're averaging 1,083 cents.
And what are we seeing just more broadly across the cattle market? Are we seeing sort of maybe we're going to slip back below the 1,000 mark? Is it what are we seeing in terms of the seasonal trend, I suppose?
There's been a lot of said at the moment. So we're doing our projections, and so they'll be released in June, the second week of June, and there will be a analyst forecast in that. So when we're reading more broadly, there are some analysts in industry saying that the Queensland, the rain that came through in April was actually too late, and so we might not be in a rebuild in Queensland this year. That's not our position, but there are some analysts out there saying that at the moment. So there is still strong restocker demand, I would stress, is this week, at the start of this week, 45% of the buyers in the Eckie were restockers. So that obviously shows that producers think that there is, or confident in the market, that they're buying those young cattle to either fatten, breed, or to buy those steers to finish off before putting them into a feeder program, and the fact that restockers were buying such an amount at 45% and buying more than feeders shows that the restocker sentiment is still there, and that's keeping prices high. Restockers at the moment are paying a 97-cent premium to feeders. So restockers are paying 1,150 cents. But we move forward all of 3 days, and restockers have dipped a little bit back to 40% of cattle purchasers, and feeders are buying 49%. But overall, there is still really strong restocker sentiment.
All right. Well, I can hear the sheep baying in the background. They're keen to have a look in as well. That's the market's down a little bit by the look of it, if we go by the trade lamb indicator. But I guess again, that's kind of what we see around this time of year.
So the interesting thing we're seeing in the trade lamb and across sort of lamb indicators is obviously there's been a lot in terms, there's still a lot of lambs out there that haven't necessarily hit the market. When we're talking to industry, there are some processors have got orders out a long time because we know that last year we had a large cohort of lambs, and they haven't hit the system because we had, the Victorian capacity restrictions last year. We then had COVID. We've had supply chain issues this year, be it across transport, and that has been caused because of COVID. Or we've seen, just ongoing, even though we had that real wave in Victoria, SA and New South Wales in COVID in January, we obviously are still seeing high case numbers. And so we know that there are still a lot of lambs that would have usually hit the market that they're still yet to come to the market. And that's what we're seeing. We're expecting that the supply of lamb will be far more stable this year, but that we may not hit the peaks that we've seen in 2020 and 2021.
So is it fair to say, if I read between the lines there, paraphrasing, there's sort of possibly a wave of lamb could still yet hit the market and that you would think would be a hit on price?
That's what we're hearing.
You mentioned earlier with this new indicator you've put on with the live export, there's a bit more digitally coming for the producer's way in terms of being able to get the latest information.
So, yeah, there's a real focus on providing more indicators to producers now, capturing different sales methods and sales channels. And so what we have put on our roadmap for the next year is hopefully being able to deliver some more indicators, expanding that live export one, and also hopefully bringing online an online indicator.
Yeah, because I gather from what I've seen, there's, you got your traditional sales in the yards, but now you're seeing a bit more online trade happening as well?
Yeah, pick up in that and of course OTH and direct as well.
Yeah, okay. Steve, look, thanks very much for your time today. Appreciate it and have a good weekend.
Thanks, Ricky.